I mean, it's interesting you mentioned individualism there versus like the idea of supporting or like working for the collective. It's something I've been kind of wrestling with a little bit. Like I used to believe that the only way to deal with climate change was some sort of like monstrous top down package. And the more I've read about how people have been trying to get this to happen for like 20, 30, 40 years, the less convinced I've become that that's the way forward. I have this perhaps like misguided belief that like that some one of the ways to the really like help deal with it is to focus on, and it's a kind of like a stoic idea almost, on to focus on what we can personally control. And as much as like I'm a huge fan of the work that XR have done, I find that like almost the most gratifying thing can be to try and like just like especially during the pandemic, it was during lockdowns, I was thinking mostly about like, okay, how can I improve my situation in terms of climate change and like my impact upon the environment in my own like little world, like literally in my back garden. And I've been kind of thinking about whether it's naive to believe that like by sorting like your personal like self out and trying to inspire other people to do the same, that you can get this like ripple effect that goes out from like from you to other people. And I mean, I've watched it happen in a few different spheres, and not necessarily like in to do with climate change, but like in terms of deleting social media apps off my phone. Like I managed to convince quite a few friends to do that, and they've all been super happy with it, and which is really cool. Or in terms of like trying to grow some of my own food, like a friend of mine started like growing avocado trees from the avocado seeds that he got, and he inspired both myself and a couple other friends to like start trying to grow stuff of our own. And I feel like that's potentially like one of the best ways in which to try and at least do something at the moment when protest and stuff is a little more difficult. I mean, do you think I'm being totally naive?
I think what you said is all good, but what I think is that yes, you're being naive if you think that's going to be enough. And that's the question that everyone has to ask themselves honestly. Is what we're doing, is what we're planning, whatever, is it enough? Is it enough to change the course of history? It's nothing less than what we have to try to do now. So it seems to me that what you set up there, Josh, was a bit of a sort of false opposition. You said you used to think it was all about top down, and now you think it's all about kind of ground up individual action. I would say top down matters, ground up individual, bottom up matters. But what really matters and where the difference is really going to be made is in the middle. And what I mean by that is we have to do stuff together, but we don't have to do it all through global conferences of world leaders. We can do it, for example, crucially, by building community. And that's one of the things that I'm focusing on quite a lot at the moment. It features towards the end of my book, especially under the heading of transformative adaptation. We have to adapt to the climate damage that is tragically, inevitably here and coming now. But we have to do so in a way that is transformative. We have to try to transform our systems. And yes, some of that will happen through a bottom-up ripple effect, and some of that will happen through top-down government action. But if it's really going to work, the stage we're at now, an awful lot of it is going to have to come through communities, localities, groups of people, neighborhoods, etc., organizing and reorganizing themselves. And one of the reasons why this is so crucial and makes such sense now is because we can no longer guarantee that governments are going to see a way through what's coming for us. And in fact, it looks very unlikely that they will, especially in countries like this one and in countries like the USA, where the government has been proven so categorically and catastrophically inadequate in the face of the COVID pandemic. And it's going to be even worse when climate damage really, really hits. People sometimes say, "Oh, well, the rich countries are going to be fine when the climate crisis really hits. It's the poor who are going to suffer the most." And of course, the poor around the world are incredibly vulnerable, and many of them are on the front lines and already suffering horribly. But it's actually arrogance and stupidity to assume that the rich countries are going to be okay. And in some ways, the rich countries could be more fragile. They've got less strong communities. They've got, in many ways, less resilience. They've got more complex systems. You just have to look at the unbelievable state failures of countries like the US and the UK during COVID to see that we can have no confidence that our governments are going to save us when it comes to the mega emergencies and disasters that are coming tragically in the next decade or two. So I say it's high time, partly for that reason, for communities to organize themselves strongly, because they cannot outsource this any longer. Governments, politicians are not going to ride to the rescue. We should, of course, try to influence them and make them as good as possible, but they're not going to be enough. Top down is not enough. Bottom up is not enough. We need to do it together as communities. That's the way we're really going to stand a chance of transforming the way we need to transforming. It's the kind of thing that the Transition Towns movement has been talking about and doing for years. But there's also a contribution being made by the kind of consciousness that's being raised by groups like XR, the kind of prefigurative and regenerative actions that XR has undertaken. And what I want to see, and this is what the transformative adaptation approach is calling for, is that kind of prefigurative and regenerative consciousness and the tools of nonviolent direct action, combined with the kind of thing that the Transition Towns movement has been calling for and doing for years, to make a reality on the ground in, to some extent, a bottom-up and to some extent a sort of locally top-down way. It'll probably involve, working with local councils, etc. The kind of stuff that we need. So that's my answer. Let's make the middle level the level at which this really works, and that might just be enough.
Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already and you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast and to our mailing list. And don't forget, my book, Brexit, The Establishment Civil War, is now available for pre-order on Amazon. You'll find the link in the description below. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.